I guess we'll get started. It's my honor to host this last plenary session. My name is Hallie Aiken. I'm a professor at, associate professor at Arizona State University. I shouldn't get ahead of myself. Diana asked me to say how much ASU and U of A get along, and we do. There's a lot of connections, so just in case you were wondering, we're the university up the road in Phoenix.
The world doesn't know the difference between us.
No, it's just, the university in Arizona. So today, this last session, we're going to be trying to come up with some synthesis comments, looking forward, what is the work that we have to do. And I'm very privileged to be able to present a distinguished panel here who's going to give us some insights. Starting with Roger Street from the UK SIP program, who will give his thoughts on what we've accomplished here at the conference and where we need to go. And then we'll follow up with Cecilia Conde and some voices from the three students who have been active in the conference all along, and will give us their thoughts before we get into some concluding remarks from Salim. Roger.
Thank you, Haley. What I thought I'd do is that I'd give you some of my impressions, some of the things I learned, some of the things that I perceived during the discussions during the last 3 days, and some of the things that, but more in terms of how they challenged some of my thinking. But what I thought I'd do is give you some of that perspective, and what I wanted to do is learn, and I called it learning from practice. But it's learning from practice to really challenge and inform us. So that's what I wanted to talk about, if I could. And I assume that I can just...
No, there you are.
There you go, okay. One of the things that became very apparent, and it was always apparent to me, but listening more and more to it today, I wander a bit. That's the only problem. I can't stand still. Okay. Was this an increasing recognition of that adaptation imperative. It's much more. I've seen it over time. I started doing adaptation back in 1985, and you can see that imperative is much more there, and there's a rapid increase in the rate of development of adaptation thinking. This thinking and the way people are approaching adaptation, you're seeing it rapidly developing. But it's also the policy and practice landscape is changing very rapidly. I can see this in individual countries. I see it I can see it in the way people are operating and organizations are operating, but it's changing very rapidly, but also the context within which we're placing that adaptation. And you heard that through a lot of the discussions, both in plenary and during the parallel sessions, and in number of the posters. You heard how that context and that landscape are changing. But also the nature and scope of assessments and actions. We're challenging some of that thinking, and you heard again in a lot of the discussions. What is appropriate? What is fit for purpose? And some of this is really related to the challenges that are taking place with the time horizon for action. But also when we're looking at implementing adaptation, it's that time horizon and when do we know we've been successful? What's the evaluation? When should we start the review? And we're seeing that not only in the discussions that we've had here, but I'm seeing it when I'm dealing with people on a day-to-day basis that are looking at adaptation. But it's also the comprehensiveness of adaptation we're now starting to look at, the depth and scope of adaptation. And what that's doing is it's raising these ideas of conflicts. It's raising the potential of synergies, though, but it's also raising the potential of conflicts. And therefore, we have to be better at what we're doing. We have to be able to address those conflicts in a very constructive way. And this is broadening in the science that we need to bring into the discussions. Desired outcomes. What are those desired outcomes? Where do we want to be? Relationship to those established mechanisms and approaches. We heard about mainstreaming during the conference here. We heard about the concepts of really trying to work within those mechanisms. Or should we? And that's some of the discussion I heard here. Should we be mainstreaming? You know, some other areas maybe we shouldn't be. I think we have to look at that, and those are some of the things that we're talking about. But understanding why we're adapting and what we're adapting to. I still think we're struggling with some of that. And in a number of cases, we're not actually quite sure of it, and I think we need to better understand that. But adaptation is occurring in a very wide, in an environment where there's a number of adaptations occurring that's dealing with adaptations to environmental and environmental changes, social and economic changes, I should say, as they're perceived. And it's keeping that in your mind. Adaptation is often done in reaction to perceptions of how things are changing. But at the same time, what this is offering us is an opportunity. And I think we need to grasp that opportunity, and that opportunity is associated to draw on well-established knowledge, but also the learning from other practices. And we need to better do that, and I can see that challenge there. And the challenges that are going on and the things that are challenging our understanding of adaptation is that you talk to people, and you talk to a lot of people, and you heard it even today during the last 3 days. Adaptation, is it a new concept or is it not? You know, people say, well, we've been adapting as a species since we started. We've got some really positive adaptations, but we got some big failures, and we still have those big failures. And I think we have to realize that the practice is not always successful because the context and landscape is different now. We adapted in a lot of cases by moving somewhere else. Well, whose backyard are you going to move into? You know, there's a lot more of us. There's a lot more of us out there, and the landscape, the political and social economic landscape is changing rapidly. There's an unprecedented rate and magnitude of change that we're dealing with. There's more of us, so as soon as there's more of us, the change becomes much more drastic. But also the climate is changing much more rapidly, as is the economics. The availability, potential, and I put potential there for a reason, but the availability of information and knowledge is unprecedented. And that results in you have people that are much more informed, but there's the potential then for conflicting framings of that adaptation. And I think this is something we learned, and we heard about this during the conference here, is in a number of occasions we heard this conflicting framings, but the need to frame adaptation is vital. And I think we need to be able to look at how we can better do that and better understand. Some of the issues or traits of adaptation are also important. There's the complexity, the interconnectivity that's going on. And this idea that adaptation is often done at the local level, but it's the scale that you really have to be careful about in terms of adaptation, because that interconnectivity. Irreversibility, the long-lived decisions that we make. You put up a building and a community forms around it. And that community is there long after the building is changed from its original purpose, and often after the building has completely disappeared. Still the roads are there, everything else is there, the infrastructure, the people, the community is there. The urgency, decisions taken now or those not taken will have implications for a long time. Some of the other things is the uncertainties. We hear about uncertainties all the time. And I think that you can't miss the fact that there's uncertainties out there. But there's uncertainties in all the drivers of change. But we have to accept incompleteness. I think that's very critical. And you heard that and people calling for that, but understanding and accepting it in an informed way rather than just blindly accepting it. And I think that's one of the challenges we have to do. We have to look at. We often talk about adaptation being a wicked problem. And it is a wicked problem. And I think that we have to understand that there is no right answer, and that we have to move beyond that. And that's what a lot of the things that we're talking about over the last 3 days have shown, that we have to accept that there is no right answer. There'll be trade-offs and conflicts. And it's all about learning, sharing knowledge and practices. Evolving demands and the nature of adaptation practice. I know some people don't like the word stakeholders because we're all stakeholders, but it's a common wording that we often use. But the number and breadth is increasing considerably. The people that used to be doing adaptation were those that are willing. And now there's not only there are more people willing, but there's more people that are required to do it by law. The breadth of adaptation is being considered offers both an opportunity and a challenge. And I think that we have to then learn about where we can take advantages of the opportunities and learn from those challenges. There's often risks and opportunities at the community level, and their interconnectivity again. And I think this is really interesting, is this dependencies, interdependencies, and dependencies between actions. And you can see this. We talked about there's no single adaptation option that you need to consider about. You need to look at the dependencies between adaptation options and the interdependencies within those options as well. And when I talk about dependencies, I'm talking about you need to build capacity in order to put into place certain adaptation options. And those adaptation options or measures need other things to support them. So it's the interlinking between those options. And that became apparent in some of the discussions I heard and some of the posters I was looking at. Improved knowledge and understanding among stakeholders is along with the naivety of available information and knowledge. It's a balance, and it's a delicate balance that we heard about through a number of the discussions. There's a lot out there, but it's the naivety about the availability of information, knowledge, and processes is often a barrier, and we have to address those. I'm not going to read everything on the slides. You can do it better than I can, so I know there's time here. So I'm being very careful. Framing adaptation in the context of decision-making is one thing I heard a number of times. Making decision-making relative to risks, thresholds, and sensitivities. This whole idea of adaptive management, consistent with the decision-making when risks and uncertainty are high. Looking at adaptive management, building capacity now to deal with today's adaptation deficit, and then incremental introductions. But this is really important because this includes the introduction of what I call transitional adaptation measures that allows you to make those major transformational adaptation measures. And that requires a different type of capacity because you then are having to know when to change, when to make the transitions, but also when to make that final transformation. And you need to manage that, and that's a different adaptive capacity. I already talked about dependencies and interdependencies, and this is getting into I'm hearing a lot more about systems and systems of systems, analyses and responses, and having to understand those. And again, you heard that in a number of cases throughout the way that it's being approached, particularly in the infrastructure and utilities area. You heard a lot about that. Action by individuals or within a sector. I have a real problem with the term autonomous adaptation and thinking it's going to bring us the answers. I know so many autonomous adaptations that are going to cost us a fortune to deal with because they were done without thinking beyond the particular issue that they were dealing with. They were not done in a manner that understood the interconnectivity. They often are not done in consultation with a number of stakeholders. And so we have to be very careful. Autonomous adaptation is not the answer. It's one of the answers, but it's also one part of the problem. Because we'll have to deal with the actions to undo the conflicts and the loss of synergies. But framing adaptation, I talk systems to systems, but we need to reflect the boundaries of our decisions and understand what those boundaries are when we're framing it. But at the same time, we need to question those boundaries and learn from others and other information that may actually challenge or not conform with our understanding of that framing and the boundaries within which we're operating. Again, you heard that with a number of the discussions that we had about different adaptation strategies and the way that we're developing those. The assessment, even the assessment, the U.S. National Assessment we heard about, it talks about boundaries and it talks about challenging those boundaries. Another aspect that I thought that was quite interesting was the idea, and I've always believed that extremes are really important, but often it's anomalies that are as equally important because they go beyond the thresholds that we're able to deal with. And so it's leading to these complex events and looking how those stretch our thresholds and therefore stretch our understanding. Got 2 slides left. I heard it many times, but this is something I always believed is the fallacy that more information will lead to action. I've seen tablefuls of information sitting on farmers' tables, and none of it's ever been opened, and they don't know what to do with it. But it's also that knowledge and engaged expertise that is really necessary. Learning and sharing lessons that we've learned through practice under different circumstances and decision framings. This is one thing I've always believed is the next thing, and those that know me, they've heard me say it 100 times probably. Adaptation does not necessarily travel well in time or space. Not just because it worked last year or it worked in Seattle doesn't mean it's going to work in Tucson. It's understanding it and understanding why it worked. And what we have done is that we're questioning the whole idea, and I heard that people talk about case studies, and the way they were talking about it, I was very interested in it, because I don't think we need case studies that tell us how and what people do. I want to know why they did it. What were the conditions that made it successful? Or I'd love to see some of the ones that made it fail. What are the conditions? Because then it becomes transferable. I can look at it whether I can transfer that information. So they become learning studies. Need to continue learning and sharing knowledge and experience, the dynamic nature of climate and the other drivers. The wicked problem I've already talked about. And engagement is an integral part of decision making, giving voice to different perspectives, disciplines, skills, etc. Sorry, I did have one more. I thought there was this last one. Framing adaptation should be looking at it in terms of achieving key objectives in the face of changing weather and climate. Using vulnerability to current weather and climate was really important because it builds that capacity as a starting point and builds the capacity to address the existing deficit, but also to address the future. Recognizing the relative role of climate. I've gone in and I've worked with people and I've talked to them and I've considered their vulnerabilities, etc. And I essentially say, you just need to monitor. Climate isn't your biggest concern, but you need to monitor. You need to take it into consideration and reevaluate whether it is in the future as well. Embedding adaptation into change management and continuous improvement, because that's what we're talking about in a lot of cases. But it's also this ability then is there to address the transformational adaptation. It's a very difficult for us thing to do to address those conflicts and trade-offs that we know are coming. Last slide. Learning from practice is essential. Building the gap between generic messages of impacts and how these drive change to on-the-ground decision. And we heard that a number of times during different presentations, is that getting away from the generic messages of impacts and how these drive change to really those on-the-ground decisions. What does learning really mean? What does it really mean? Who needs to learn? And what do they need to learn? For what purpose? And how might that be supported? And it's all those aspects that we need to look at. And you heard it through different activities and different presentations that this is what they were working on. And if you break it down into what they were talking about in a number of cases, building the networks, engaging people, this is some things that they were looking at. Greater specificity to learning goals, getting a research. And this is one thing I picked up on, and I think Richard will be happy that I picked this one thing up. He said a number of things, but research that informs is really important. Rigorous. We need to be more rigorous. We need to be building on that existing knowledge. And I think that was a key message that I thought that came out of here. It's one that I picked up on anyways. Knowledge and evidence based on information. Relevant, accessible, credible, but also effectively disseminated and supported. And it's looking at this learning is there to inform, consult, engage, and inspire. And I see that as a spectrum, and I see we have to address all those areas if we want to see adaptation move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. So now we'll hear from Cecilia Conde from the National Autonomous University of Mexico in Mexico City, a climatologist with a vast experience in adaptation and climate policy, to give her reflections on the conference.
Thank you, Hallie. I want to thank the organizers for inviting me to say my last doubts, perhaps some ideas regarding this conference. I want to thank especially Diana Lieberman, who was a teacher of mine not long ago. And she's always committed with these problems of global change. And okay, thank you to Diana Lieberman. and the organizers. I think the question addressed here, what's next for adaptation, is a question that we could construct together. Since we've been in this conference, we have learned a lot, at least I have learned a lot, and I think I have to address and ask me again many questions. One of those, I think, is for adaptation, who is asking is a key question, as we have seen in this conference. We got excellent presentations regarding private, public NGOs and communities, especially communities. I think we got great results, particularly coming from young people, young researchers. So that's very important for me. I also think we have more presentations regarding gender, cultural, and age, indigenous peoples, children, young and elder people. I don't remember if we addressed this question in this conference, but I think it's important. If you look at our results 10 years ago regarding climate change, we talk about stakeholders, but we didn't realize those stakeholders had gender or culture or age. So now it's important. IPCC has several chapters involving in the fifth assessment report indigenous people and also gender. So I think they are the new, let's say, actors in this issue of adaptation. Also, it's important because if we want to know adaptation, we need to know the attitudes of those agents or those stakeholders to risk. Are they risk adverse, risk lovers? So we need to know more about how they made decisions, if any decisions are made along climate variability and change. And also, I think, even though we have discussions here, we need to take more interest in, or those stakeholders have different or conflict of interest. Because sometimes we think adaptation is a list of good actions and everybody will happily adapt perhaps in the future. And we have forgotten that in their way there might be conflict. And I think these acts, if the responses to climate change are mitigation and adaptation, this equity, this ethical problem of equity is something we should try to address in every study, I think, in the future. And the last thing in this slide, not the last, but in this slide, we have to ask ourselves if they are asking anything to us, because of course we could do academic research, the best academic research we could, but we have to know if they are asking something and we are not addressing it. The next thing, I think it was also discussed and many, not some, but many presentations addressed was where did the question come from? And we had sectoral, interesting sectoral new methods and new results. And also we have the discussion of global, regional, urban, which are new actors, these cities acting, considering climate variability and change, and rural sector. And we have, of course, the question of consistency. If we want to downscale or upscale, we have the question of that results or the data are consistent. And of course, conflict of interest and equity. And something that I think it's very interesting to address or to think about is why, if they are asking, why are they asking the question? And we had several presentations considering extreme events and changes in temperature and precipitation. And also it would be very interesting to know if they are answering the question, asking the question, because they have observed changes in their practices, policies, and institutions. So that would be a way to see if adaptation is moving and occurring, I think. Particularly, I think we have interest, but still two law studies regarding changes in institutions and policies. This is one of the star results and figures of the fourth assessment report. We have observed not only changes in temperature, but in biophysical systems. And I think in the fifth assessment report, we have to ask ourselves or look if people are adapting, or they don't even notice the changes on those sectors. And possible answers, I think, any answer regarding adaptation has to be scientifically rigorous, but also politically relevant, and that is a challenge for all the scientific community. We can do our science and publish our papers, but we have to ask ourselves what are the political decision makers are asking and if our science is relevant for them. It's also true that we can be very politically incorrect, such as addressing and seeing what factors determine our current vulnerability. Why are we getting more and more vulnerable? And I just put, and in very small letters, corruption, because in an hypothetical country, there might be scarce of resources, human and financial resources, and suddenly they disappear, or we have a very good expert in an issue, and suddenly you have the cousin of a friend and making decisions. So that is a waste of knowledge and a waste of money. Also, we have to ask timing. We might have some adaptations, but perhaps they arrive out of time, and there are limits and barriers. Also, I think after this conference, we have new questions, new methods, and we have to ask if we are rigorous enough with the concepts. I have 2 more slides, but I don't remember. Did I have 5 or 10 minutes?
10 minutes.
Down? That's it?
2 more minutes.
2 more minutes, okay. Finally, 2 more slides, thresholds. It's similar to one that was presented here. I think if you see the slide published in Scientific American, I think 2010, we are over 10 times the threshold of losing biodiversity and 3 times the changes in the nitrogen and phosphorus cycle. Of course, we are also above CO2 concentrations. So I think considering these environmental problems, we should, for future studies, look, this is a slide that Holmgren from the FAO presented in the international seminar we had last year. 10 countries, we are 10 countries developing new, I think, hopefully, new methods to address adaptation. And he presented this and said, of course, in the international level, we have the UNFCCC, or let's say us, the Biodiversity Convention, and also there are struggle for reducing desertification and land erosion and food security and whatever. But at the local level, a local reality, people don't see the difference between conventions. Scientists might be because they're different budgets now, but people live with this different, it's in the same place and the same problem. So I think it's also time that climate change researchers that are interested in adaptation should consider the different problems like biodiversity and food security, not as a separate problem. And this is, of course, sequestrated from this climate-smart agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you, Cecilia, for very provocative comments. Now we'd like to hear from our student participants who have been paying active attention during the conference, and we'll start with Zach Guido from the University of Arizona, and he's going to give us 2 minutes of reflection on what he's learned and where he thinks we need to go. I hope that doesn't put you in a bad spot.
No.
Okay.
So I'm just going to say a few words, largely because I'm still distilling a lot of the great talks and informal conversations that I've had in the last couple days. But I did want to say something on a personal note that I just broke my record for most number of shots of espresso consumed in a 3-day period. So if anybody can top 15, we need to talk. Okay, so one thing that was obvious to me is that there's a lot of adaptation efforts going on at all scales, from the strategic directions of USAID to documenting the perspectives of climate changes of people living in rural Himalayan communities. So in the opening plenary, I spoke of the optimism in using climate change as a fulcrum for improving welfare and management, and I think the last 3 days has only fortified that opinion. So as a way to partially summarize this conference, I just wanted to point out 4 themes that I cued into and that I heard repeatedly. The first one is that the most effective adaptation strategies reduce risks now, while also providing development benefits. Number 2 is it's critical that stakeholders are involved in the knowledge creation process. 3 is we should support the decision process with people. It's more than just models. And 4, that there's ample information exists for adaptation, but it's in limited use. And major efforts are needed to better connect this information to the right people and right places. So in keeping in line with the title of this session, I thought I would just give a few of my thoughts about what's next building off of these 4 themes. I think we need to expand the dialogue about the function and utility of people working in the space between research and practice. And I think it's critical to make sure that useful knowledge generated in the universities and elsewhere, even if it's not generated with an end use in mind, is better connected to practice. And equally importantly, it works the other way, that we need to make sure that the information gleaned by practitioners is fed back into research. But more specifically, we need more case studies that address such things as, how do we do this translation effectively? What are the obstacles and opportunities? And we need a better way of understanding if we're even asking the right questions. So I'd just like to end by suggesting a way to partially fill these gaps, and that way is to perhaps create more opportunities for career tracks that span the research and practice boundaries. And that's my plug for opening more doors for early career scholars like myself. So thanks.
Thank you very much, Zach. Very inspiring. I hope we can live up to creating you some job opportunities in the next decade. So now we're going to hear from PK Ngong, who is from Cambodia, but now is a student at Clark University.
Thank you. Let me start by just saying that it is unbelievable that I am starting to feel more comfortable talking to an audience this big, and most importantly, to an audience that have been really shaping my intellectual development as a grad student. You know, while I was preparing to come to this conference, I was in the middle of trying to put together my dissertation proposal draft and finishing off my second year in the PhD program at Clark. And on top of that, I was also preparing for my summer research for the Young Scientist Summer Program, which starts tomorrow at the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis. And obviously, I thank the US National Academy of Science for the generous support. I was, in fact, very stressed out about these tasks. And so 2 of my advisors at Clark, Tony Bebbington and Colin Polsky, told me to forget about the dissertation and forget about the EASA and just have fun attending this conference. So I thought to myself that it would be fun to come to this conference and try to attend as many as possible, the talks that will be given by many of the scholars whose work I have a tremendous amount of admiration and whose work have given me a lot of hard time trying to think about what is it that they are trying to say. And I'm glad to say that only 2 of the people from the list of people that I really want to listen to were not presenting. They are Karen O'Brien and, of course, Dana Liverman. However, I am extremely grateful to have the opportunity to listen to some of the brightest scholars, for example, Joseph Alcamo, Man Perry, Cynthia Rosenzweig, Holly Eakin, and most importantly, Susan Moser, who I and a bunch of geography students at Clark really look up to. And just so you know why Susan is one of the best PhD graduates from Clark. Now, did I manage to not think about my dissertation and EASA work? No. It is a good no, and I'll tell you why. There are two incidents that really gave me both the encouragement to keep on pursuing my PhD research, and at the same time gave me a new perspective to look at the questions that I am asking in my dissertation. The first incident was the comments that Professor Martin Perry made in one of the parallel sessions. He said, and of course I paraphrase, that it is not enough to just talk about the same old strategies that would reduce our exposure to climate events, because reducing exposure doesn't necessarily mean more adaptation. The second incident was the panel yesterday on adaptation and development, when the panelists were asked to compare and contrast the big A adaptation versus the small a adaptation. As a young scholar, I thought it was very encouraging to hear from the panelists that the big A adaptation is likely to be unsustainable if it is not based on scaling up of the small a adaptation. Also, as a geographer, I get excited when the conversation is on moving across global, regional, national, and local scale, because I think that's what we are known for. I thought it was also encouraging because as a young scholar, we are always haunted by the question on the significance of our work, especially when trying to put together grant proposals. And that question is always about how would our work fit with the bigger picture? And that because much too often, the dissertation work that we are doing, myself included, tend to be context-specific. And thus, it was encouraging to hear from the panelists that it is important to do that context-specific work as well as we can when we are doing it, because it might be scaled up. And because in the end, the bigger picture is actually made up of the smaller pictures. So in conclusion, it has been an incredible experience. And once again, I thank Professor Dana Liverman for the invitation, and also her amazing team here at the university and the conference organizers. This is actually my first adaptation future conference, and I look forward to attending the next one. Thank you.
Thank you, PK. Now we'll hear from Laura Canevari, who is from Columbia, but now at Oxford University.
All right, good afternoon. First, let me thank all the people who, during this conference, sat patiently with me and kindly answered to all of my questions. The past 3 days have been really exciting and challenging at the same time, as I chased interview victims from room to room while I was still trying to accommodate enough time to go to all of my selected talks. And as you might have just noticed, timing didn't always work on my favor. More importantly, these 3 days have been a strong reminder for me of the importance of undertaking inter- and multidisciplinary research and of how crucial stakeholders' engagement is for the success of adaptation projects. I've decided to briefly talk about 3 main issues on this closing session. Firstly, the things that I feel that changed between the conference 2 years ago and this conference, because I think it's important that we keep an eye on the trends that we are creating. Second, the things that I found most valuable in these past 3 days. And finally, a personal message that I would like to give to you. So the first thing, what have been the main changes since the last adaptation conference? I think this time there has been a larger representation of developing nations, in particular from countries in Africa and the Middle East, although I am yet to see a high representation of Latin American countries. Another difference that I noticed was that, at least from the parallel sessions that I attended, there was a broader use of mixed methodologies and a greater integration of the natural and the social sciences. This, I think, reflects the fact that we cannot work in adaptation without integrating different disciplines, and without accounting for both the biophysical and the socioeconomic components of our system of interest. Although I realize that a full transition is far from being complete, I feel we are moving away from traditional reductionist approaches to knowledge production, and we are starting to seriously engage in finding more comprehensive ways for interpreting and understanding socioecological systems. Now, moving to what I found most valuable and I enjoyed the most of this conference, I really appreciated the effort that all of the speakers put into their presentations and also the work put on the posters, because they were all very interesting and insightful. But I want to thank in particular those speakers who provided a more critical and introspective view of what doing research in this field actually means and what does it entail. I think we really need to better reflect on what is good practice in adaptation. We need to think more carefully on what the best approaches to meet our inquirer needs are and what the limitations of our investigations are likely to be. I got challenged yesterday by Richard Klein at his plenary speech for saying that science is always changing and expanding, and he was certainly right to do so. Science only changes if we, as individuals, question current approaches, if we seek to redefine existing methodologies, or to create new ones where they are absent. I am therefore really grateful to those who reminded me that scientific approaches to adaptation can be quite subjective and can be determined in many cases by what we think as being important. So my conclusion on this is that we need to spend more time exposing the weaknesses of our assumptions. And we need to strike a better balance between talking about the success of our investigations and reflecting on our practices. I realize this can be a very hard thing for scientists to do because we are all very eager to share the success of our stories. But I feel that we are here to build also a strong and robust community of adaptation scientists and practitioners. And we should therefore feel comfortable enough to trust each other, share our failures, and challenge our assumptions. Finally, from multiple informal conversations that I had with people, it has become really clear to me that there are significant barriers to knowledge co-production and to user-minded research. And these are two important aspects in adaptation. And some of these barriers stem from how scientific research is rewarded. Although it is true that we do not have full control on the reward system and how it works, I feel we have underestimated the influence that people like those on this audience can have in determining how future generations of scientists engage in scientific processes. I would therefore like to finish by reminding you of the strong influence that you exert in young scholars. Through your work as supervisors, as teachers, or mentors, you can make the next generation of scientists more thoughtful of the importance of interdisciplinarity and more willing to engage in participative and collaborative processes. This may not be a full change from the current system, but it is a start. So I want to encourage you all to support young scholars who may be thriving to build a career in interdisciplinarity and who believe in the need for user-inspired and user-minded research. And I also want you to encourage to promote within your community more introspective studies on how we are approaching adaptation challenges. Finally, I'd just like to thank the organizers of this conference for such a wonderful work, and I look forward as well for the third conference on climate change adaptation. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Those were very inspiring and challenging comments from our younger scholars, and I hope we can live up to satisfying some of those demands and interests. I think it's a real challenge and one that we should rise to the occasion to support. So now I'd like to turn the mic over to Salim Houk, who's he's now the chair, I understand, of Provia. And we'll be giving some final thoughts as well as some new directions for our community.
Thank you very much, Haley, and good afternoon to everybody. As Haley just said, in the opening session, you heard from Martin Parry, who was the outgoing chair of the Scientific Steering Committee of Provia. I have now taken over as that chair of that scientific committee, and it's my pleasant duty to give some remarks of thanks at this closing session, which I'll do in a few moments, but I can't resist the temptation of also sharing some reflections of my own and some ideas going forward. So I'll share three reflections and three ideas going forward. The first one is very much echoing Laura's point about the difference between the conference 2 years ago and this one. I found a lot more developing country, young scientists here, and Diana was telling me that the number of abstracts that they got was amazing. They weren't able to bring as many good abstracts as they would have liked to, but we've nevertheless got quite a few people here. And one of the pleasures personal pleasures I have in attending these meetings, which was reinforced over the last few days, is meeting these bright young people from all over the world. So that's been a tremendous opportunity for me as well. The second, I think, difference, and again, Laura touched on this, was that it isn't anymore just primarily an academic or a research gathering. There are quite a few practitioners in this audience, both from the developed and the developing countries. And I think that is the way forward for us as we develop this new adaptation knowledge base that the world is going to need. We will need to have practitioners and scholars working together and co-creating this new knowledge. And the third is to reflect on how we've come forward in our concepts and understanding of adaptation. And I would point to two factors or issues that struck me in this meeting. The first one was the focus on trying to monitor and evaluate what it is that we're doing. I think this is an extremely good way to do that. We haven't perhaps cracked this yet, but we are certainly applying our minds to this, and this is something that we have to do. As scholars, as analysts, we need to ask the questions of what it is we're trying to achieve and how do we know when we achieve it. The second one is the notion of moving from incremental adaptation to transformational adaptation. I think this is a new concept that we heard about here on a number of occasions, is something that we should be thinking more about, and to me is a much more optimistic view of adaptation than the incremental type of adaptation, which is just dealing with the vulnerable and impacts of climate change by themselves, and in future may well be a major contribution that adaptation science will be able to make. Let me go on to discuss three challenges and for me opportunities going forward based on these. The first one is the multidisciplinary nature of adaptation work, and we had a debate in one of the sessions on whether there was such a thing as adaptation science, and one of the participants said there wasn't. I felt that there may not be one yet, but there's probably an adaptation science in the making, and maybe by the third, fourth, or fifth conference, we will have a more mature adaptation science. But I thought Richard Klein put it very well as to where we are now. He said that we may not have an adaptation science yet, but we do have adaptation research. And that is something that people from different disciplines, whether they be natural sciences, engineering sciences, or social sciences, can all participate in. There's a role for many different disciplines in participating in adaptation research and potentially developing that into an adaptation science. The second challenge is how do we facilitate this co-learning of knowledge between practitioners and scholars? We are not well set up. Academia is not well set up to go out and reach out to practitioners, particularly vulnerable communities on the ground, which is my particular concern, the poorest, most vulnerable people living on the planet. And I feel, and I'll make this appeal to everybody here who is interested in studying climate change adaptation, that think about them and think how you can reach them. And if you're interested in working with them and connecting with them, come and let me know, because I have a lot of friends there, and I can put you in touch with them. And you will learn a lot from them. You cannot just teach them. You will have to learn from them. And try and outreach to the most vulnerable communities, whether they're in your own countries or in other developing countries, if you're interested. And the final point I'd like to make is how do we enable the co-production of knowledge between developed countries and developing countries? The paradigm that we have now is one in which production of this knowledge generally happens by and large in developed countries, and then it's about transfer of knowledge and technology to the South. I think adaptation gives us an opportunity to, if not reverse that, certainly make it a co-production of genuine partnership between developing countries and developed countries. And in that, there's also an opportunity for much greater South-South learning. One of the biggest opportunities that we have and impediments, barriers that we have at the moment is that there is very little transfer of knowledge or sharing of knowledge south to south between the continents of Latin America, Africa, and Asia. When we scholars or people, academics or researchers from Asia meet others from Africa and Latin America, we have to come to the US or Europe. There is very little connection south to south across these continents. And for the powers that be that are going to be making these decisions for funding future research, I would recommend that they think about how we can facilitate that. As many of you know, I'm setting up this new center in Bangladesh, an international center on climate change and development. And one of our major objectives is to promote South-South learning. And in every one of our courses, we bring people from practitioners and academics from Africa. We haven't been so successful with Latin America yet, but we have an ambition to do that. And I think we need to find better ways of linking these three continents directly without having to come to the US and come to a meeting like this. And so finally, let me do my pleasant duty as chair of the Scientific Steering Committee of Provia. The first one is to thank Diana and the University of Arizona and our hosts and everybody that helped set this meeting up for a very successful meeting. So could you join me in thanking them? And my last duty is to tell you where we might have the next conference. So we had a lot of very, very good applications, which is a very good sign of interest from countries like the Netherlands, Japan, South Africa, Malta, Florida. But we have a winner, and the winner is now Brazil. So 2 years from now in Fortaleza, Brazil. I look forward to seeing a lot of you there. Thank you very much.
Now Diana will provide some closing remarks.
And so that you all know the Brazilian ringleaders, I think, Jose, you're here, right? Do you want to stand up and wave? Those of you who are going to be the hosts. So, and if you thought having a banquet on a garage was good, I think in Fortaleza they should try for the beach, but we'll see if they can manage that. So I, of course, have some thank yous, but then I want to make some personal remarks. The first thing is to thank our conference sponsors, and many of them have been here, and I'm sure now they've had their thanks in meeting some of the people that they've sponsored and seeing the interactions at the conference. But I wanted to thank my own university, the University of Arizona, that put resources in, and in particular, the Institute of Environment, the Renewable Energy Network, and the Water Sustainability Program all contributed funds and in-kind staff support to the conference. I also, of course, want to thank Provia, who helped support the conference from the start, and the scientific committee, many of whom are here. They helped give advice on the plenary speakers and the agenda. They provided moral support, especially Martin Parry, but also Jean Poludikov. Richard Klein and I had a drink over somewhere in Boulder and came up with some of the plenaries. But people like Balgis, Chris, Joe Alcamo, Cynthia Rosenzweig, Carolina Zambrano have all been great, and you've seen many of the Provia people in the sessions. We're especially grateful to USAID Asia office, who came through with funding to support many of the scholars from that part of the world. Andrew Ash from CSIRO provided some unrestricted resources. And then Oxford University, the Inter-American Institute, and the Climate Change Research Program at UNAM all provided funding to make sure that some of their friends and members could be here. And I'm sure there are other groups that supported you to come. And it's really wonderful to see that success. In terms of thanking my own staff, they're going to hear over and over and over again how grateful I am. But let me just mention a couple of them. The communications and design team Stephanie Doster and Melissa Kerr in particular really helped with the design and put the program together. Poor Melissa will be wearing the black E of shame for a week, but we did find it. But she's an amazing designer, and you love the logo, I know. And she also designed the T-shirt, and we are going to try to find a spot where those of you who wanted to buy a copy of the conference T-shirt will be able to do so. I'll tell you a bit about how to keep in touch later. The IT guys, Matt and Ray, have been fantastic, running around trying to keep everything going. Normally they're just dealing with a few staff whining about our computer's not working, but to make this work was absolutely fantastic, and you can thank them all when I finish thanking them. The Elsevier team who was here, particularly Marie-Claire, was great, and they've been great to work with. I really want to thank my colleagues at the Institute who supported us doing this. Jonathan Overpeck, Greg Garfin, Jim Beiser, Dan Ferguson, and many others have been supportive for the year and a half that we've been working on this. At UNEP, Janak Patak was the main contact and support for Provia. Two of my people who keep me going, Betsy Woodhouse and Lisa Langan-Duberry, were just fantastic in helping. And then we had a whole bunch of volunteers. And for the volunteers, the opportunity to meet you all and to help was really great. And we had volunteers from all across the university and all different levels. I actually think the Memorial Union's done a great job. They've felt very good about the banquet last night and are thinking about trying to do some more. We were an experiment, and they saw how well it went, and even the security guys said, wow, you guys had a great time and you were all so well behaved. And I would like to thank KUAT, which is our local public TV station. It's based in the university, for doing the webcasts and the videos. And for those of you who live in the United States, remember to support public radio and public television. They desperately need our help. I would like to, I don't have awards for these people, but I think we should all acknowledge the award for the best amateur mariachi was Professor Patricia Romero from NCAR. She's left. Yeah. But there are numerous pictures that are being posted to Facebook of Patty's performance with the mariachis. And I think the best costume definitely goes to Greg Garfin. If you didn't go to the pirate radio session and see Greg dressed as a pirate, you really missed out. Okay, and in terms of logistics, I have a couple of things to say. One is, please pick up yesterday's posters across from the registration desk or give them to somebody. Maybe we can just paper the garage with them if you've left them behind. Please remove today's posters by 6 o'clock. I'll finish before then. If you are willing to coordinate transport logistics, go to the board in the atrium, because somebody has set up a set of group rides to the airport at low cost with Aristona Stagecoach from the Likens dorm. So do go sign up for that if you can find it. So in terms of follow-up, lots of people have asked about us posting the presentations online. All the abstracts, of course, are online. And what we would like to post presentations online. So what we're going to do is we're going to send you one email next week. So please read that email from us. And it will ask a series of things. The first will be permission to list your name and your email address on the participant list so that you can get in touch with all the wonderful people that you met. And if you don't want your email listed, you must let us know. I think we'll make it an opt-out on that. So do let us know. There's a survey that we're going to ask you to fill out. There'll be a conference evaluation form, which is not just you know, to hear about the terrible things and the good things. It's really to help the next conference organisers do an even better job. We learned a lot from the Australian evaluation, so we'd really appreciate you filling out. It's going to be a very easy survey monkey. It'll take you 5 minutes. We will ask whether you will give permission for us to post the video and the PowerPoints from the plenaries. We do need permission legally, the university website. We can't post things without permission. But we're also going to ask everybody who presented if they would like to send us a PDF, a PDF of their PowerPoint or a paper that they gave, or if you didn't get your act together to have either a PowerPoint or a paper, send us a link to a paper that relates to your presentation so that people can share research. And we will then commit to maintain until the next conference, the conference website with all of the links. And I'm terrible about this because I've been asked to do this a few times and I realized, oh, I didn't put an acknowledgement on that picture and it takes me weeks to do it. But please don't take weeks to send us your presentation. Please send it as soon as possible. So we will have the plenary webcasts on our website and hopefully links to all of your wonderful work. Now, there's one more person I want to thank, but have I forgotten to thank anybody else? Can you think? I've thanked everybody I can think of, yeah. Okay, I've had a great time. So my personal reflection is that just about 2 weeks today, I am presenting in the Science Forum at Rio that's being organized by ICSU and the other international organizations. And I will be presenting on adaptation. And what I'm going to do is talk about what happened at this conference and the messages from the conference. So even though I haven't spoken formally at this conference, I've been very inspired. I will probably have to look at the videos because I was running around during some of this and read your abstracts, but I'm hoping to do a good job of reflecting the spirit of the conference. And I may just steal some of the ideas from these wonderful three here who really seem to synthesize what happened. And I'll try and send around that presentation. And maybe I'll do one of those presentations and say I had 700 co-authors who were the people at this conference. But it is an opportunity for us to, as a group, we don't have a conference statement, but I'll do my best to reflect your feelings. And if anybody wants to email me about something they'd really like to make sure I say in Rio about this conference, feel free to do so. So finally, is Thomas there? Where is he? Thomas, come up. Okay. All right. So everybody knows him as Tom 1, but we're really grateful for everything he did to make this conference a success. A lot of the staff are getting some time off for the work that they did here. Tom hasn't seen his wife and his new baby for weeks, or just very briefly, and he's got a lot of things to fix around the house, so we wanted to give him a gift certificate for nice things around the house on all of your behalf. So we want to thank Tom for everything that he's done. He's been great. And on that note, I would wish you all the best going home. There were a couple of flight cancellations, but I just, in the spirit of we want you all to be happy, I just checked the flight board, and there don't seem to be any more cancellations or delays if you're going out tonight. Some of you I will see tomorrow, I know, because you're at some of the workshops, but it's been wonderful to have you all here, and hope to see you in Fortaleza. Thank you.